Dear learners, we have been discussing about the evolution of the concept of human rights. So far, we have discussed the origin of the human rights from Magna Carta. And as discussed in the previous lecture, human rights have evolved over centuries. And the catalog of human rights is dynamic and ever expanding. So, that evolutionary nature of human rights we have to understand. In our previous lectures dealing with the evolution of the concept of human rights, we traced the origin of human rights from the Magna Carta of England 1215 to the French Revolution of 1789. We also discussed about the Glorious Revolution of England. We also discussed about the American War of Independence and what kind of contribution they gave. We highlighted the contribution of these great revolutions to human rights as we discussed. These revolutions emphasize the first generation human rights. The first generation human rights are also called negative rights, or what we understand as civil and political rights. One of the major contributions of these revolutions was limiting the absolute powers of the kings and restricting the arbitrary exercise of power by the state. As we have been pointing out that the state is major violator of human rights as well as the protector of human rights, but we find that at that time, especially during the medieval time when the state used to claim divine, means kings used to claim divine right, divine power, divine authority, at that time there was a lot of exploitation of the people. Also you'll find other institutions were there like papacy or the church, and then feudal lords. So at that time this kind of exploitation was there, and that's why the limiting the authority of the state or the authority of the feudal lords or the authority of the papacy or the authority of the king was of course something that was the need of the hour. This was the reason that the people first of all demanded the civil and political rights, and they tried to put curb on the arbitrary absolute powers of the kings. It can be understood as the establishment of democracies and responsible government. With this recognition of the civil and political rights, through great revolutions and important events from Magna Carta to the French Revolution, you'll find what happened, that democracies were established. People were made the stakeholders in the power of the state. Sovereignty, the absolute sovereignty was not claimed by the individual now. The people were, declared as the sovereign, exercising the sovereign authority was on the basis of the will of the people. John Locke's defense of natural rights, the right to life, right to liberty, and right to estate or property, capitulates the spirit of these great movements and revolutions. You see, when John Locke said that these rights are natural, that is right to life, number one, right to liberty, number two, and then right to estate or property, these number three. So these rights are natural. They are not gift of a state, they are gift of nature, and they were available to people even before the creation of the state. And that's why the people wanted to make, or people wanted to preserve these rights forever, and this was the reason that they entered into a contract and created a state and government. It shows, it provided a kind of normative justification to the claims of people to have certain rights. We also discussed that it emphasized that the state does not create rights, but the state is created to preserve and promote rights. So, state is not the giver of rights. The state is state has only recognized those rights. These rights were already available even in the state of nature. A state of nature means a stage when the state had not come into existence, when the political authority was not there. So that is why this is important. It also emphasized, John Locke is the father of natural rights theory. So here you'll find what is being said, that rights are natural and the state is an artificial institution created by people through contract. So rights are natural and the state is an artificial institution which has been created for the benefit of the people. Thus, the state was the means, and the individuals and the people and their happiness were the end. So a state cannot be elevated to the level of God and it should be worshipped. Rather, the authority of the state will be limited, and that limitation will be imposed by the people because their rights cannot be taken away. The rights, for example, the right to life, right to liberty, right to property, cannot be taken away by the state because the state was created to preserve and promote these rights only. So, therefore, you see, this was a very important development, and the John Locke's justification of rights and the legitimacy that he provided through his theory of social contract is a very, very significant contribution. So, when the freedoms and liberties of people were under threat from authoritarian regimes and reactionary and conservative forces, civil and political rights were demanded and successfully achieved and secured. However, we should remember that the civil and political rights at that time, they were of course important when the conservative orthodox institutions were there and they were trying to limit the freedom of individuals. They were trying to curtail the freedom of the individuals, sometime in the name of religion, sometime in the name of power, sometime in the name of the unity of the state, sometime in the name of the divine power of the king. So that is why the civil and political rights were, of course, very, very important, and that is why they were demanded. But you'll find, as we discussed, that human rights are evolving, they are expanding, and the constantly evolving human rights we should try to understand. So, after the recognition of the first generation of human rights, that is civil rights and political rights, that is what we call negative rights, you see that the new challenges, new developments were there. The Industrial Revolution in Europe created new problems and challenges in the 18th and the 19th centuries. Earlier, you all know that there was agricultural economy. So that is why in the agricultural economy, most of the time the exploitation was there by the king or by the papacy or by the feudal lords, especially of the peasant. So that peasantry was being exploited. Arbitrary kind of revenue was imposed upon them. So that is why, when the economy was agricultural, the main competition or the conflict was between the peasants and between the nobility. But now you see, there was transition from an agricultural economy to an industrial economy, which impacted all walks of life. This transition that the machine-based production, started, and that brought what is called industrial evolution in Europe. When we are trying to understand the industrial evolution and its impact and what kind of challenges, what kind of problems, what kind of grievances that were there at that time, and what kind of rights were demanded, then the following developments should be kept in mind in this context. First of all, you see, because of industrial revolution, what happened? There was exodus or migration of people from rural areas to urban clusters. Urbanization started wherever the big factories or the industries were there. The people from the rural areas migrated. This migration was a kind of forced migration. What happened? Because of the machine based production, that the small producers, especially for example iron smith, for example a carpenter who was doing some kind of own work, having his own workshop, and having his own market in 5, 6, or 10 villages. And he was the master of his own labor. He used to determine the cost of the labor as well as the cost of the product. Also, he was living in a very emotionally supportive environment, in his own locality. But now, because of the machine based production, what happened that he could not survive. And he could not survive. So earlier, he was the owner of his own product. Now, he was forced to migrate from the rural areas to the areas where the big industries were being developed. So that is why he migrated. While migrating, he also left behind his emotionally supportive environment. Many of them, they migrated from rural areas, leaving behind their families and going to the urban cluster to work. There, you see a lot of problems they faced. The problems, like, for example, you see, if these people, those who were earlier the master of their own product, their own labor, they used to determine the cost of labor. If they were not feeling well, you know, they were closing their shop and taking rest, but now it was not possible. What happened? The emergence of a new class of industry owners and their subsequent control over the estate that emerged. The emergence of a new class of industrial workers, that is also important. So first of all, you will find that the factory owners or the capitalists, they were there, or those who were owning the factories or the industries. On the other hand, there were the we also saw during this phase the emergence of new class of industrial workers. These workers who were working in big industries. The advantage of the factory owners to exploit the dependencies of the workers and determine the cost of their labor. That also we have to take into account. These challenges were there. So what happened that these people, since they migrated, left behind everything in their own areas, and they came to the urban cluster, which was alien to them in many cases. So ultimately, what happened that the factory owners, or what is called capitalist class, was in a position to exploit the dependencies of these people, and that is why it was trying to determine the cost of their labor. In most of the cases, the cost of the labor that this class determined, that was very low. It was not adequate, and this was the reason that the capitalist class, or the this merchant class, or the factory owners, they were flourishing by leaps and bounds, and the other hand, the laborers or the workers, they were living in a very bad condition. At that time, 14 hours a day or 12 hours a day, and that too in hazardous conditions, these workers were working. That used to also affect their health adversely. And the wages that were paid to them, that were not adequate. This was the reason that the the plight of the workers was something, that influenced many political thinkers, that shaped and guided the political thought of many political philosophers of that time. It had created what is called the capitalist workers divide. So the plight of the worker was something, that was a challenge. And that is why, you know, although civil and political rights were there, but the civil and political rights were there in most of the cases for the people, those who were owning some kind of property, or the people, those who were having, a particular amount as tax. So it was the property people were given, the people who were wealthy people, they were given the voting right. Universal adult franchise came later. So that is when these people were not in a position to influence the decision making. Rather, state was controlled by the economically dominant class. So ultimately, and this economically dominant class was trying to manipulate the power of the state to its own advantage. Under this kind of circumstances, you will find that socio-economic challenges became important. Earlier, you see the civil rights and the political rights were emphasized. Why? Because the arbitrary power of the state was there, arbitrary power of the king was there, absolute power of the king was there. Now, what happened that under this capitalism, or under this industrial evolution, The plight of the working class was the most important thing, and this was the big, the vast masses of people. It had already created mass poverty. Their condition was deplorable. So under these circumstances, socio-economic challenges became important. This was the time when socialism or Marxism tried to address these challenges, socio-economic challenges. It cannot be denied that Karl Marx was one of the greatest or most influential political philosophers in the history of political science. It was his ideology or his ideas, that divided the world into two hostile blocks, that is, capitalist and the socialist. Karl Marx was moved by the plight of the worker, and that is why he wanted to emancipate workers from the exploitation of the capitalist class. So, his contribution is immense so far as the development of socialism as an ideology to challenge the hegemony and domination of the capitalist class is concerned. Marx and Engels tried to emancipate the working class, what they called proletariat class, from the exploitation of the capitalist class or the bourgeois, and the socialist movement became stronger, demanding socio-economic rights. You will find these socio-economic rights were demanded by the socialist movements. For example, when we are discussing the plight of the working class, you know, Marxian alienation is very important. He is trying to highlight the plight of the working class, and he says that the working condition was such that the workers used to develop alienation, first of all from alienation from the nature, alienation from the art and literature, alienation from nature, alienation from the family, alienation from the work, and finally alienation from himself. And that's why there are issues, that still, they are persisting. But Karl Marx and Engels and other socialist thinkers, they tried to address these challenges and these problems. The theory that was developed by Marx was called scientific socialism or Marxism, and Marx exposed the exploitation inherent in capitalism, and he developed the theory of surplus value, and he showed that how the the cost of labor that was determined by the capitalist class, that was very low, and since the cost of labor that was determined by the capitalist was very low, so this was the reason that the working class was living in a very bad condition. As pointed out, at that time workers used to work 14 hours a day, 12 hours a day. Healthcare facilities were very poor, wages were not adequate, and because of that a lot of exploitation and sufferings were faced by the working class. So first of all, he exposed the exploitative nature of capitalism, and he said that what is happening, that there is already the two classes are existing in the society, that is haves and have nots. He said that the bourgeois class or the capitalist class is the class of haves, and the proletariat class or the working class is class of have nots. The have nots, basically, they were not conscious, according to Marx, they were not conscious of their exploitation. So that is why, through his dialectical materialism or economic determinism or class struggle or the theory of revolution that he developed, he tried to he tried to sensitize them about the exploitative nature of capitalism and gave a clarion call that is already there in the Communist Manifesto of 1848. He said, and I quote, it is mentioned in the Communist Manifesto: "We, the communists, disdain to conceal our views and aims. We openly declare that we believe in forcible overthrow of all existing social conditions. Let the ruling classes tremble at a communistic revolution. Working men of all countries unite. You have nothing to lose but your chains. Unquote. These were not merely harmless words. They were just like deadly missiles for the capitalist class. It inspired people in different parts of the world. And you'll find in the 19th and the 20th century that socialism or the socialist movement became stronger. People, the working class especially, they started demanding rights. They started demanding different kind of rights, socio-economic rights. These socio-economic rights included the right to work, the right to social security, health, education, adequate wages, the right of workers to participate in the management of industries, and the right to join trade unions and pressure and interest groups. These rights were emphasized. What workers wanted, they wanted their participation in the management of the industries so that, there cannot be exploitation of the working class because the wages were fixed. Who was determining the cost of labor? Of course, the factory owner or the capitalist class. And since they were determining, so they were profit oriented people. According to Karl Marx, you see what happens basically, or the socialist thinker, they say that the capitalism is an ideology that believes in maximization of profit, maximization of wealth, and it develops a kind of ethics in which, under which you will find that the maximization of wealth and profit is always glorified. It becomes the main goal. So, of course, capitalism is profit oriented, not service oriented. And that's why the exploitation of the labor that was there. According to Marx and Engels and other socialist thinkers, they say that if we see the production and the production relations, we find that the most important thing in any kind of production, industrial production, of course, is labor. All the things, for example, you can see that if there is a factory of furniture, and if that factory is producing 100 pieces of furniture, table, almiras, chairs, and all. So what happens that the first of all they will bring wood from somewhere, and of course the workers will go to bring that wood. They will cut the tree, and after that they will make it into small pieces. Then they will bring it to the workshop or the factory, and in that factory again they will work to make it almira, whatever, all kind of production they will be involved there. And say for example, if the 100 workers are working in a particular furniture factory, and if that furniture factory is producing 100 pieces of furniture and they are selling in the market, and after selling the market, for example, if the factory owner is in a position to get, say for example, 2 lakh rupees, the cost of the furniture, then you have to calculate the cost of production. According to Marx, that the tree that and the tree where it is growing in the soil, that belongs to nature. It doesn't belong to the factory owner. The air or the oxygen, carbon dioxide, whatever is needed, that is also provided by nature. The sun, water, everything that the tree is getting, that is also provided by nature. So that is, something that is the gift of nature. It is the labor of the working class that is improving upon, and then it is making it a costly, thing, a costly commodity to be sold in the market. But what happens, the cost of the labor, for example, if the 100 laborers or the workers are working in that particular furniture factory, and if they are being paid 200 rupees per head, it means 20,000 that he is spending on the labor. You can say another 20, 30,000 on other things, instruments, and in the tree and all these things that he is buying. So ultimately, if the cost of production we are calculating, even it becomes 50,000 or say 1 lakh rupees, then every day that the factory owner is getting 1 lakh rupees. So he's earning 30 lakh rupees. On the other hand, a laborer is working 6,000 rupees. So, the factory owner become richer day by day. And this, the laborers, they are in a very bad condition. So this was the reason that you see Karl Marx and Engels, they were moved by it. And ultimately, they highlighted the plight of the working class. They demanded these socio-economic rights, and the socialist movements were built up in the different parts of the world, and that led to what is called ultimately the Bolshevik Revolution in 1917, the Russian Revolution. Because of the Russian Revolution of 1917, and then the expansion of communism in Eurasia, and then in China, Cuba, and many other countries. So that's why this communism or Marxism or socialism became very popular in the 20th century. And ultimately, you'll find socio-economic rights. They were recognized by the society. The Bolshevik Revolution, that is why, played a very, very important role. The Bolshevik Revolution of Russia 1917 in providing impetus to what is called the socio-economic and cultural rights. After that, you see that when the socio-economic rights were emphasized, what happened that in many capitalist countries also socialist political parties were formed, socialist movements were built, and these capitalist countries also accepted and incorporated these socio-economic rights, and they provided these rights to working class. So that is why it is one of the greatest achievements. So the first of all, we achieved what is called the first generation of human rights through what is called bourgeois revolution, or the liberal democracies, that were established because of that. And then you will find, because of the socialist revolution, because of the socialism, that we found that socio-economic and cultural rights were emphasized, and finally they were incorporated in various constitutions of the world. The Russian Revolution of 1917 played a very important role, as French Revolution has played very important role in providing or giving recognition to the civil and political rights, as American War of Independence, Magna Carta, Glorious Revolution. Similarly, the Chinese Revolution of 1949, Russian Revolution of 1917, and the establishment of socialism in the different parts of the world, that provided impetus to it, and ultimately socio-economic rights and cultural rights were recognized. They are called second generation human rights, or they are called positive rights. So, dear learners, I think that we have started our journey from the origin of human rights in the Magna Carta, and we have already discussed the various developments, events. All these events are important, and all these rights are important for all of us. And today we see that these rights have been recognized in the International Bill of Rights that we are going to take up in the next lecture. Thank you very much.